any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence your mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. And when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name for the record. I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong. Commission Vice President Richards.
Here.
Commissioner Antonini.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Moore.
Here.
And Commissioner Wu.
Here.
We do expect Commissioner Hillis to arrive. Commissioners, first on your agenda is consideration of items proposed for continuance. Items 1A and B for case numbers 2014-1041 DNX and CUA Downtown Project Authorization and Conditional Use Authorization at 391st Street are proposed for continuance to April 7th, 2016. And item 2 for case number 2015-012722 PCA, the Inclusionary Affordable Housing Program Planning Code Amendment, is proposed for continuance to July 14th, 2016. I have no other items proposed for continuance, and I have no speaker cards.
Is there any public comment for the items on the continuance calendar? Not seeing any. Public comments closed. Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the reason for the continuance on these two items. I understand, but for the benefit of the public, because one of the items was a very potentially a long item, and apparently the first available date is July 14th for that.
July 14th isn't the first available date. I believe the decision by the Mayor's Office of Housing for the Inclusionary Affordable Housing Program was to allow the ballot measure to be decided on before the Planning Commission taking up this matter, and so they requested July 14th as the continuance date. The First Street project, I believe there was a notification issue associated with that.
All right, thank you. And then I will move to continue the items to the dates requested.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion, then, to continue all matters as proposed, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0 and places you under Commission Matters. Item 3, consideration of adoption draft minutes for March 10th, 2016.
Okay, is there any public comment on the draft minutes? Not seeing any. Public comment is closed. And Commissioner Moore.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion to adopt the minutes for March 10th, 2016, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0 and places you on item 4, Commission comments and questions.
Commissioner Antonini.
I spoke with Secretary Ionin, and apparently we are now beginning to schedule items to come before us in the month of July, which is a long ways off. And, you know, we are going to continue to have instances as we had today where large items are continued for one reason or another, thereby pushing other items further and further forward. So I'm going to just propose to the Commission and see how they feel about it, opening up June 30th as a possible date, because I've heard from a lot of project sponsors and the general public about how long it's taking to get on the calendar, and might help to have an additional day available at the end of June to start calendaring some items.
I don't hear any interest in that initially, but I will say that if things start to, I understand your concern, and if things start to get continued or slide that way, as we get closer to the June 30th date, we can always reopen it at that time.
I think it's within 30 days or whatever we have to do to
The 2 weeks before we could do
2
it,
weeks.
right?
As long as we get out an agenda in advance, we can reinstate that meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Moore.
I would then also ask that we balance that discussion with an input from the director. He's in charge of the rest of the department, because there has to be a balance between all of those. And I would very much appreciate for that question to be very succinctly asked from the director.
Did you want me to? I'm happy to. I mean, I think that's. I thank you for asking. I mean, I will check with staff on that. If it's 3 months in advance, it does give us some time. April, May, June. It does give us some time to plan for it. I will say that staff does plan, including myself. I won't be here next week because we originally were not going to have a meeting next week. So staff does plan its travel around and vacations around those fifth Thursdays sometimes. But if 3 months in advance, it does give us some time to consider that, although I would ask that we not wait until 2 or 3 weeks before to try to make that decision 5 or 6 weeks before, if we can, just to know if there's going to be a meeting then.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Richards.
Interesting to note, in yesterday's New York Times, it caught my attention, council passes housing rules championed by mayor, and New York, I guess, was going through its own discussion on a density bonus for developers if they provide certain levels of on-site affordable housing. Interestingly enough, they are planning, it looks like it's going to go through because it passed all the different various local councils, to set aside 20 to 30% for all new units for the density bonus or for any type of rezoning based on greater height or density. And the target population for those 20 to 30% are people making between 40 and 80% of the median income. So it's just an item to note that happened in New York yesterday, 2 days ago.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, we can move on to item 5 under Department Matters, Director's Announcements.
Thank you, Jonas. Commissioners, I just wanted to briefly update you on the Mission 2020 strategy. We've been having very intensive, robust meetings on all aspects of that strategy. You are scheduled to have an informational update on May 5th. Where we'll be talking to you about the strategy. We are having a first large public meeting in a while on April 6th, which is 2 weeks from yesterday. We will get you an announcement on the specifics of that. The strategy has a lot of different facets, only some of which relate to land use controls and planning code changes. A lot of them have to do with other aspects of retaining the Mission District's population, tenant controls, eviction controls, that sort of thing. We've also started, for the first time, a series of meetings that include both members of the community as well as members of developers who are active in the neighborhood and other interested members, so that we are having a dialogue, frankly, on both sides of the table, across the table, on parties that might not often agree on these issues. That has been productive as well, and I've committed to hosting a series of those discussions in the next few months so that we can have more open communication between parties of different points of view on these issues. So we are planning on getting to you on May 5th, but before that there will be a public meeting on April the 6th. And the primary goal of that public meeting will be to set some priorities of this very, very long list of strategies that we've developed out of that program. There's probably 3 or 4 dozen different strategies that we're exploring, and clearly we can't do them all at once. So the idea is to try to prioritize which of those strategies we will move forward with in the next couple of years. So with that, we'll send you the announcement on the public meeting on the 6th, and we'll look forward to being here on the 5th. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
Commissioners, item 6, review of past events of the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Appeals and the Historic Preservation Commission did not meet yesterday.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs. At this week's Land Use Committee hearing, the committee heard the landmark designation for 171 San Marcos Avenue. At the hearing, planning staff provided an overview of the landmark designation and responded to questions raised throughout the presentation. There is one speaker in favor of the designation. At the end of public comment, Supervisor Peskin moved that this ordinance be recommended, and that motion carried unanimously. At the full board, the supervisors considered Supervisor Avalos' ordinance that would increase the TSF fee by approximately $2 for large non-residential projects. The board passed this ordinance on its second read a few weeks ago, but on March 11th of this year, the mayor vetoed this ordinance. In order for the board to override the mayor's veto, they would need to pass the ordinance again with at least 8 votes. However, the motion to approve only received 6 votes, with Supervisors Breed, Cohen, Tang, and Wiener voting against the motion, while Supervisor Farrell was absent. There's one introduction of note this week. It was by Supervisor Yee, and it was a planning code amendment to amend the dwelling unit mix requirements in zoning districts without density controls. And that concludes my presentation.
Commissioner Antonini.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Starr, thank you for your report, as always. 171 San Marcos, maybe that sounds like it's in Forest Hill. Maybe you could familiarize us what the historical nature of the house is.
I can ask preservation staff to maybe send you the designation. I believe it was from my recollection, it was a modern 1940s home that was designated for its architecture. But I'm sorry, I wasn't part of the discussion. But we can get you more information on that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Commissioner Richards.
Mr. Starr, if you could, the Supervisor Yee's introduction, can you just explain a little bit what he has around unit mix requirement?
Sure. So right now we require a certain percentage of rooms to be, or apartments to be 2-bedroom and a certain amount to be 3-bedroom. This creates a formula that allows more flexibility so that you get credit for maybe doing a 4-bedroom unit.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, we can move on to general public comment, not to exceed a period of 15 minutes. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission, except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes. I do have several speaker cards.
James Haas and Ozzie Ram.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Jim Haas. You may recall I spoke before you a month or two ago after your staff made a presentation regarding the Civic Center Public Realm Plan. I shared with you a letter I had written to the Recreation and Park Commission, which pointed out their neglect of the plaza for 50 years. That neglect and ignorance of Civic Center is much more pervasive. Last year was the centennial of Civic Center, and the AIA chapter nor any other group even noted it. And furthermore, the celebration that was held for City Hall treated it as a freestanding building not related to a carefully planned civic center, the most complete in the country. During my many years of working on Civic Center, I have examined what is available in writing about Civic Center, and there is not very much, and what is available is generally antiquated, amateurish, incomplete, and perhaps full of errors. It was not my intention to write a history of Civic Center. I had hoped to find a graduate student to do so, but having searched around the country and offered money, I never found anyone who wanted to take it on. So a number of years ago, I sort of decided to try my hand at it. And with the help of the San Francisco Museum and Historical Society and their publication, The Argonaut, I have published 3 sections that I have bound and made available to you in this document with the yellow cover. The second section is the most recent. It just came out, and I sent it to the mayor with a cover letter. And you will note I make a couple of points, one being that, and this is sort of brand new information that nobody has really known about, that Civic Center is a product of the Panama Pacific International Exposition Company. The businessman ran James Rolfe for mayor, and through him created Civic Center. Civic Center is basically the second dimension of the PPIE. None of that was referred to last year in the celebration of the PPIE with all the nostalgia and so forth, but it never got into any of the more relevant parts. And the second thing is that Rolfe, who provided the leadership to build Civic Center, depended on a master planner, which is John Galen Howard, who tends to be left out of the public remembrances. People seem to think the Civic Center was developed by Daniel Burnham, who was dead by that time. And he is the man who designed Civic Center, placed City Hall where it was, ran the competition for City Hall, chose the architect, supervised the architect, and really is the man most responsible for Civic Center. I bring this document to you in hopes that you will read it so that you too will be a more positive force in restoring Civic Center to the grandeur that it should be. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ozzy Rome with Protect Noise Charm. So I'm here today to voice our concerns about a new trend in our neighborhood, Noe Valley, and that is the proliferation of monster duplexes. It's been a couple of years that we've been fighting monster homes, and it seems to me that the developers are sensing the favorable climate for adding more to the housing stock in San Francisco and using that to push the same out-of-scale, out-of-character homes that are basically a menace to our quality of life, but under the guise of adding to the city housing stock. So last night I was in a post-application meeting. Believe it or not, this is something new to me too, because I knew of pre-application meetings, but then this was a post-application meeting organized by the developer and project sponsor. And they were going through their plans for transforming this little small house in Noe Valley to a 5,000 plus square foot. And on top of that, they were going to transform the little garden shed to what they call auxiliary dwelling unit. So we questioned the legality of this, and they said, well, this is something approved by Supervisor Wiener and Mayor Lee. And obviously the intent of whatever's been passed as ADU is not for people to change their garden sheds to in-laws. But this just points to the enormity of the problem that we're faced with today. Not only they are changing tack to instead of building monster homes because there is a backlash against it, they're moving to monster duplexes, but they're also taking every bit of what exists in the backyard as storage, garden shed, to pass it as in-law, livable space. So my question to you is, when is the city going to update the planning code and guidelines to deal with this out of scale and out of character development and construction? Because to us, it doesn't matter if it's a single family or a duplex that is enormous, doesn't fit in the neighborhood, and it's a menace to our quality of life. Every week almost, you are here to hear or approve multi-unit projects. Today you have one before you, 160 units. And these units are no more than 1,000 square feet. Some of them are 700 square feet for two-bedroom. So tell me, why is it that it's okay for Western neighborhoods to bear the brunt of living next door to 2 units, each 2,000 and plus square feet? I mean, this is not right. And I really urge you to do something and change the code or the guidelines to help us. That's it. Thank you very much.
Is there any additional general public comment? Okay, not seeing any general public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards.
I think just one item to note. My understanding of the ADU legislation was that it had to stay within the envelope of the existing building.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, we can move on to your regular calendar. Item 7 for case number 2015-017728 PCA. Planning Code Sections 260, 270, 309, 329, 735, 743, and 744. This is a Planning Code amendment.
Thank you. Tina Chang, Planning Department staff. The item before you is a request to recommend approval of the amendments to mid-block alley and rooftop screening and enclosure controls in the affected sections of the code, and also to make and adopt findings under Planning Code Section 302, 101.1 in the general plan. The proposed amendment would result in more consistent application of mid-block alley controls where applicable, and also expand their applicability to adjacent zoning districts, including the SOMA NCT, Folsom Street NCT, and RCD. One change to the ordinance has been made since the initiation hearing on March 3rd, and that is that bulk controls per section 270.1 and 270.2 will now apply to buildings that have street or alley frontage rather than just street frontage. They, of course, have to have frontage on more than 200 feet in length. The proposed amendment would also allow more flexibility in rooftop screens and enclosures, subject to design review in Section 309 and 329, allowing the maximum permitted height of an enclosure to cover up to 100% of the roof area. To date, the department has received one comment suggesting that the mid-block alley controls be moved to another code section. The department recommends that the commission recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors for planning code amendments to section 260, 270, 309, 329, 735, 743, and 744, and make and adopt findings under planning code section 302, 101.1 in the general plan. This concludes staff's presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Project sponsor, please. No project sponsor. Is there a public comment on the side? Seeing no public comment, public comments closed. Commissioner Moore?
Ms. Chang, the one question I want to ask is, and I think it was mentioned when we had our preliminary hearing, I would like to see a reference that this includes removal of any obsolete equipment on the roof prior to permitting any new. That is something which we had discussed previously, but I think it might be referenced in this particular legislation.
So this doesn't discuss the removal or existing equipment. It's more talking about the screening of equipment for proposed new construction. However, I suppose that the enclosure could be proposed for existing buildings, but it does not affect the removal of equipment.
No, but when you talk about the adding of new equipment in specific locations here, that often means replacement and new equipment. Technology changes. And the one thing I would like to see cross-reference is that all old equipment under this new provision would have to be removed once you start using this legislation to exchange or remove equipment. To exchange equipment, add new equipment, that there is a cross-reference to some provision by which old equipment has to be removed, which does not always occur.
So the legislation does not touch the equipment whatsoever. It only talks about the screening of the equipment. Mechanical equipment, the controls that govern the amount of mechanical equipment that can be placed on the roof does not change whatsoever, and it just doesn't touch the equipment piece.
And I think the commissioner is suggesting that we add a provision that relates to that, which seems we could probably do that in the context of this legislation. I mean, this legislation could apply to existing buildings, right?
I suppose so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think the suggestion is simply adding a provision that when the enclosures occur, that obsolete equipment be removed. That seems pretty doable in the context of this legislation.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
That's me.
Commissioner Johnson, yeah.
Okay. Hi, sorry, I'm still Kay Dooley on here. So just to Commissioner Moore's point, totally agree. We've talked about this a lot. The only thing I would say is maybe we suggest that the staff make sure that that provision isn't elsewhere before putting it here, just because I feel like we have a couple different ways of covering it. One is we just passed some changes that would require 10-year reapprovals of mechanical equipment for cellular equipment, and that includes the need to remove old equipment if it's obsolete. And in addition, I think even before that, we also looked at some rule changes that make it so that if you are going to put if you're asking for a new CU, you have to take off old equipment before you can implement the equipment on the new building. So I think we have a couple of different ways of addressing that, and I just want to make sure that we're not crossing wires. But I agree with Commissioner Moore that we need to address that. So maybe staff can make sure that we're covered there, and if we're not.
If I may, just to remind the Commission, when we discussed hospitals, which have a special status in rooftop equipment, we brought that up for the first time. That was ultimately adapted to hospital-type equipment and changing equipment. But as we're now picking it up again, I'd like to see a general recall, as you were suggesting, to something which is codified someplace.
Right. And so I think I'm following along as well with that. I remember the conversation around hospital equipment, but I think we also, that's why I want to ask staff to look at it. I think we also passed something in regards to equipment in general. And I can't remember if it was an official planning code change or whether or not it was unofficial. If you are applying for a CU, the property that you're looking at, you have to agree to take off the old equipment before you put on new. I don't know if that was
specifically related to cellular antennas, but I don't I don't recall the other legislation. Maybe.
Right. I think it was for macro and micro, wireless. I can't remember. So that's kind of what I was asking staff, but I mean, okay.
We'll make sure that there's consistency in the code and that this provision is clear. Yeah.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, just a little bit of clarification. So from reading the report, this legislation will include eastern neighborhoods south of Market mixed use and south of Market C3.
For the rooftop screens, yes.
Those are the only areas. It doesn't have any bearing on areas north of Market or in other parts of the city.
Sorry, the mid-block alley controls only apply to those districts and the ones that would be added. So correct, north of Market, C3 districts, mid-block alley controls would not apply.
Okay, then a little bit of a clarification on the 60% open to the sky. Maybe you can explain it a little bit, because we have these discussions often, and for the benefit of the public and for us, just means any addition to an existing building or any new construction cannot block sunlight in a certain manner.
So the mid-block alley has to meet certain dimensional requirements. So, for example, it must be at least 20 feet wide, and for that entire portion of the mid-block alley, it must be 60% open to the sky, meaning that 40% can be covered after a 15-foot head height clearance. So there could be building within the mid-block alley that covers up to 40% of the mid-block alley. Does that make sense? For example, if there's like a bridge that crosses between two buildings that are fronting onto the mid-block alley.
So we're talking about something covering the alley, or are we talking about the shade on the alley?
Permitted obstructions, so like bay windows and balconies and things like that, would be permitted so long as they were not provided within 15 feet of the first 15 feet of height within the mid-block alley. But after that, a building or covering could theoretically be placed in the mid-block alley so long that it didn't cover more than 60% of that whole area.
Right. So it's actually physically over the alley. That's what you're talking about, rather than just a shadow cast on the alley.
Correct.
Okay, so this is just...
There's like a physical structure.
It would have to be a pretty big bay to be over 40% of the alley, but I would guess...
And if it was a bay window, then it wouldn't comply with Section 136. So, permitted, it has to kind of comply with the regulations and controls for permitted obstructions. But the code does allow for some building to be within the mid-block alley.
Okay, thank you. I understand.
Commissioner Moore.
No, I had already spoken.
Commissioner Richards.
Move to approve.
Second.
You want to add that?
Yeah, did you want to make that amendment?
Yes, and that would be an amendment to add what are we doing?
Recommend.
To recommend adding a provision that out-of-date or outmoded equipment be removed before new equipment can be added to buildings covered by this.
Accepted.
Absolute.
Right.
Thank you, Commissioners, Commissioner Richards and Johnson. So there is a motion, Commissioners, to adopt a recommendation for approval of this proposed planning code amendment as amended to include looking at obsolete equipment and its removal. Commissioner Antonini?
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Wu?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Commissioner President Fong?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0. And places you on item 8 for case number 2014-002961 CUA at 1699 Market Street. This is a conditional use authorization.
Oh, are we missing someone?
Okay, Jonas, it appears that maybe staff is on the way. Can we take items out of order?
Absolutely, Commissioners. If the staff for items 9A and B could prepare herself for her presentation, the Commission is ready for you. Commissioners, we'll be taking items 9A and B out of order for case numbers 2013.0431 C and V. However, I don't see the zoning administrator here.
And Commissioner, okay, hang on.
And he should be here for the second part of this matter.
Okay.
We'll take a break.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Existing commercial building and construction of a 9-story, 198,151 square foot mixed-use building that includes up to 160 dwelling units, approximately 10,820 square feet of residential common open space at the first, second, and rooftop levels, and 3,664 square feet of ground floor retail commercial that will front Market Street. A total of 82 basement-level accessory parking spaces with primary access off Stevenson Street and secondary access off McCoppin Street are proposed. 128 Class 1 bicycle spaces would also be provided that would be accessed independently at the ground floor, and 33 Class 2 spaces would be added as part of the PUD's required streetscape plan that also includes other improvements to the public right-of-way. Under the provisions for a PUD, the Commission may grant modifications from certain planning code requirements for projects that exhibit outstanding overall design and are complementary to the values of the surrounding area. The proposed project requests modifications from the rear yard, usable open space, and off-street loading requirements pursuant to Planning Code Sections 134, 135, and 152, respectively. The subject property is located near the western boundary of the South of Market neighborhood and is within the Market and Octavia plan area. 1699 Market Street's location is significant because of its location at the convergence of 4 other neighborhoods, including Downtown Civic Center, Western Addition, Castro Upper Market, and The Mission. The property is approximately 25,900 square feet in area and within the moderate-scale Neighborhood Commercial Transit, or NCT3, district, which has a height and bulk limit of 85 feet. It is currently improved with a two-story, 22,000 square foot commercial building that is currently occupied by Flax Art and Design, an arts and crafts supply store. The irregularly shaped parcel has 150 feet of primary frontage along Market Street, 50 feet of secondary frontage along McCoppin Street, and 20 feet of frontage at the spur of Stevenson Street. Since the packet was published to the Commission, the Department has received about 8 additional letters, 4 in support of and 4 in opposition of the project. The Commission is being provided copies of those correspondences today. After analyzing all aspects of the project, the Department staff finds that the project is consistent with the Planning Code, priority policies, and the general plan. The project is an infill development that will add 160 new dwelling units to the city's housing stock and 3,664 square feet of commercial space in an area that encourages development of high-density housing, mid-rise housing, and continuous ground floor commercial frontage with pedestrian-oriented retail activities. The project is compatible with the existing neighborhood character and provides an appropriate massing and scale for the subject block. The project's design is of high quality and will complement the rapidly changing nature of this location on Market Street. The project complies with the First Source housing program. The project will provide significant streetscape improvements, including landscaping, street trees, activation zones, bike improvements, and others that will be coordinated in conjunction with the current development of the Better Market Streets Plan and Public Realm Hub Plan. And there should be a clarification, Commissioners, on this staff report and motion. The project is proposing to provide on-site affordable housing as identified in Section 415.6. And that will include a total of 19 units for the 160 total units. As part of the project, the sponsor has entered into a Costa-Hawkins agreement, and a copy of that agreement was provided for you just a minute ago. And finally, the project would be subject to development and impact fees for the construction of net new commercial and residential development, which is estimated to be about $2.86 million. Based upon these findings and those described in the draft motion, Department staff recommends approval with conditions. The project sponsor is present and has prepared a presentation. This concludes staff's presentation, and I am available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Project sponsor, please.
Oh, well. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Honorable Planning Commissioners, City staff, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Conroe. I'm at 1390 Market Street in San Francisco. I'm here to represent the sponsor. Thank you for the opportunity to present our project to you. It's been 3 years of hard work, and today's the culmination of that. I have been a San Francisco resident and have owned a San Francisco-based small business for over 16 years. Over the past 35 years, I've been involved in community service in San Francisco. For example, I was instrumental in helping the San Francisco Jazz Concert Hall in Hayes Valley, only a few blocks from this site, get built. I served on the Finance and Facilities Committees for several years. I've also done thousands of hours of work of community service in San Francisco in the area of homelessness, serving on the advisory board of City Team for 10 years, as well as starting their mentoring program where I mentored a number of formerly homeless men. Simply put, I'm a San Franciscan who loves San Francisco. Over the past 2 years, we've taken great care to design a project which is consistent with the Market Octavia Plan, incorporates feedback which we receive from the city, our neighbors, and the community, and will bring a high-quality, well-designed, successful apartment rental project to this transit and bicycle-rich location. We are proud of our team's effort and believe the proposed project will bring much-needed rental housing and contribute meaningful to the affordable housing crunch by providing 19 affordable housing units on site. The project will create a lively, engaged pedestrian experience along Market Street to include newly created public realm space that can be programmed for public uses. We fully support the important bicycle community by providing much more needed bike parking than required by code. We're providing over 200% of public bike parking compared to code. We fully support the transit-oriented position the site holds, doubling the number of car share spaces than required by code, and reducing our parking almost in half from our original proposal of 0.75 spaces to now 0.48 spaces per residential unit. We've spent considerable time working with our neighbors, especially those that abut our project, to listen to their concerns and try to do our best to address them. This has resulted in us winning the support of most of them. Finally, our project will provide many lower and middle income jobs to locals, both related to construction and with the retail space on Market Street. Importantly, over the past few years, we have spent considerable time working to keep Flax in San Francisco. We extended their lease several times to accommodate them at no cost to them. My company spent hundreds of hours searching for new sites, evaluating sites that surfaced, and advising them. We were instrumental in finding their Fort Mason location. We love Flax and look forward to seeing them in San Francisco for decades to come. We sincerely ask for your support today in helping this important and long-awaited project move forward expeditiously. We're available to address any questions you have. I'd like now to introduce the architect for the project, Vernon Lohman from SCB, who will address the evolution of design that's occurred over the past 2 years as we listen to the city, the community, and our neighbors to arrive at our current design. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jonas, the lower mic, please.
Thank you, Commissioners, city staff, and audience to listen. Very pleased to present the design for 1699 Market here in San Francisco. I've been involved with a number of projects, residential projects in San Francisco recently, including 923 Folsom, Block 6, in addition to work on 150 Van Ness and 100 Van Ness just in the neighborhood here. I'd like to take you through some steps of the design process, where we are and how we got to where we are, and take you through the design of the project. You are familiar with the site, bounded on the north by Market, on the south by McCoppin, with Goff and Valencia Street nearby as well. Interesting site, one of the more interesting sites I've ever worked here in the city. A flag-shaped site that has, it's a good-sized site, but interestingly has very little frontage, about 150 feet of frontage on Market, about 50 feet of frontage on McCoppin, and about 35 feet of frontage on Stevenson. As such, the site, being somewhat landlocked, presented an interesting design problem with its limited frontage for windows and so on. So as a result, the overall sort of planning of the project created two separate buildings in effect on the site. A C-shaped courtyard building on the north side of the site along Market Street, and then a somewhat freestanding building on McCoppin Street, creating two open courtyards in the middle of the site, and allowing sunlight and light to come into the apartment units that are around that courtyard. We've also developed a significant light well along the northeast property line next to the Allen Hotel that adds up to about 25% larger than their existing light wells currently. This image depicts where we are currently as of today with the design of the project, taken from Market Street, looking at the Market Street facade of the 9-story building. Active uses on the ground floor with a lobby and commercial of about 3,600 square feet, 160 total units, and a massing of the building that we believe is very respectful and for the historic building next door, and in keeping with the street wall and character of Market Street as well. Stepping back a little bit in time, when this process started, this is going back to April 2014, in fact, with our original PPA proposal. Very similar scaled building at that time, of course, with active uses on the ground floor and a 9-story structure total. As we went through the design process, we started evaluating some of the massing concepts for the project and started shaping the building in response to some of the influences in the neighborhood, where on the right side diagram you see where the corner of the building lifts up higher towards the intersection of Valencia and Market Street, and the massing on the building on the left side of the project dips down to the street to address the residential lobby, and creating a more dynamic, active form for the overall facade. And then as the project evolved, we looked at materials, colors, sometimes some very interesting colors such as a bright red, which didn't seem quite appropriate at the time, but nevertheless were investigated. And and then as we evolved through that process, created a palette, a very subdued and sophisticated palette of a light gray porcelain tile that sort of worked in contrast with the brick of the building next door. Then, as we continued through conversations with the city departments and so on, we addressed some concerns such as the height of the building and how to address giving the massing of the building a sense of a top, middle, and base, middle, and top by setting back the upper floor about 2 feet and creating a different contrasting material at that point. And then addressing the relationship of the corner of the building to the historic Allen Hotel by stepping back the massing along that property line. Then looking at what is in this neighborhood called the Market Street Masonry Discontiguous District, which is comprised of about 8 separate buildings within several blocks that have a very similar character of masonry with contrasting terracotta and white details. And this created an inspiration for an evolution of the palette of the building, going from a gray tile to a richer copper-toned and mottled tile that is kind of a modern interpretation of the brick masonry of the buildings next door, and then contrasting accents of lighter color stucco. And this is how the palette of the building evolved over that time, from the left to the right image. And some of the considerations we took into effect for the relationship of the building next to the building next door at 1693 Market. And then summarizing some of the important compositional and design motifs that relate the building and the mass and the design of the bay windows, the punch windows, and so on.
Thank you, sir. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have further questions for you, we'll certainly give you a holler. Opening up to public comment, Adrian Simi, Keith Bally, Tess Wellborn, Lynn Valenti, and Danny Campbell.
Good afternoon, President and Commissioners. My name is Adrian Simi. I represent about 3,500 carpenters, men and women, and apprentices in San Francisco. And first off, I'd like to thank the sponsor for using a signatory general contractor for the project. We do believe it's a great project. It's in a great area, doesn't displace anyone. All it does is provide homes, much-needed homes for San Franciscans. And with that, I would like to say thank you and hope that you'll support the project also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Tess Wellborn, representing the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association Transportation and Planning Committee. And based on our 16 years, you have our letter there, supporting the Market Octavia Better Neighborhoods Plan, we oppose the current version of this proposal. We want to encourage you to make these changes. The project should have a minimum of 20% BMR, zero parking, and proper consideration of the public right-of-way. In the Market Octavia planning process, the community worked closely to create strong urban planning designs, and the ground floors were designed to be 15 feet high. The fact that this developer is planning a lower first floor gives them an extra floor with no additional benefit to the public. So they're getting additional value from that extra floor by their design, as well as proposing modifications to rear yard, open space, off-street loading. And all of that means that we should be getting more value back from their altering the Market Octavia plan. And we think that a 20% requirement of on-site BMR would do it for the housing part. We would point out, in addition, that the area is transit rich. This is another perfect project for zero parking. The unusual feature of the public row, the public right-of-way in front of Flax, which is now parking, we call that to your attention, that needs to be carefully looked at. Another point I'd like to bring forward from our letter is that the developer has several blank walls. And if you're coming down Market Street from Upper Market, you will be seeing blank walls above the Travel Lodge. And we think that that is a design feature that really needs to be changed. So in conclusion, we think that the developer is getting a big benefit by shrinking the commercial height and getting an additional floor of housing. So we feel that you should increase the BMR to 20% from all of the benefits that they're getting, and look at zero parking and the other features I've raised. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
I'm Keith Bailey, a resident of McCoppin Street, and I've talked to some of my neighbours. We face the McCoppin Tower at the back of the development, where there's currently a car park. Until this hearing was announced, I hadn't realised there was a plan to put 9 stories. I knew it was going to be redevelopment, but I had understood it was going to be more or less in keeping with the existing highest buildings. And although Market Street has clearly gone in the direction of 9-storey, we haven't had anything like that on the McCoppin side, facing 4 or 5-storey condominium blocks at the back. I don't know if this item can be passed around just to show the projection of the McCoppin site, and maybe the architect has a better facade of that. So my main objection is that that's out of keeping with the character. It's going to be darkish red, I believe, appearance. It's going to be somewhat overwhelming. And there was a shadow plan, but it was dated very early in the project. I'd like to know if the one I saw dated May 2014 is still current with the 9-storey, 85-foot tower. Yes, okay. So I would like some modifications to the plan. I'm not opposed to the plan entirely at all. But on the back side, on the McCoppin side, I would like to see that reduced to be in line with the highest buildings currently there. Any questions?
No, but there may be some when we open up to Commissioner comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please. And we did receive one other card, John Dittmar. Dittman.
This is this one, I presume. I presume this is this one. Yeah, my name is John Dittmar, and I live at the Allen Hotel, which is next to the proposed project. I support the project. It will improve the neighborhood and provide jobs to the people like me. I've been homeless I was homeless at one time for 25 years. I've lived at the Allen Hotel for 3 years. And I also have to vouch for Mark. Mark has been my supporter, my sponsor, my mentor for over 13 years. He has driven me to hundreds of AA meetings and attended those meetings with me while I am now not homeless for over 25 years. I have lived on the streets of San Francisco. Without Mark Conroe in my life, I would probably still be homeless, or even worse, I could be dead. I know other formerly homeless men who Mark has mentored over the past 10 years. Please approve this project so more affordable housing is created in my neighborhood, and so I can apply for one of the jobs this project will create. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Fong, fellow commissioners, staff. Danny Campbell, representative with Sheet Metal Workers, Local Union 104. We feel this is a high-quality, well-designed project. It's literally 3 blocks from our Union Hall on Market Street. The project sponsor, Mr. Conroe, made himself very accessible, listened to our concerns. We think it's going to be a benefit to the local community and the city for several reasons. You know, it'll stimulate the local economy because it's going to provide good-paying, middle-class union construction jobs that pay, like I said, good middle-class wages, health care, and retirement benefits for those workers. Furthermore, because union contractors will be on this project, that means there will be career pathways for our local youth through our state-approved apprenticeship programs. And finally, the project sponsor should be commendable for providing those BMR units on site, especially at a time when our city is facing an affordability crisis. So we express our support for the project. I'd like to further add that my colleagues with the Electrical Workers Union, Local 6, the Plumbers and Steam Fitters, Local 38, and the Fire Sprinkler, Local 483, all support this project. They could not be here in person today. They're out of town, out of state, actually, on business. So thank you very much for your time.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Lynn Valenti. I live at 1346 Stevenson Street, which is 1/2 block. The part of Stevenson Street that I live on is 1/2 block from the back of the project. Stevenson is covered at the end by the Central Freeway ramp. So to give you an idea, if you can visualize where that is, that's what I'm talking about. I have a couple of concerns with this project. One, I think the parking garage entrance and exit on McCoppin is not a good idea. The reason being that Stevenson is filled with traffic, even though it's an alley. People coming off the freeway at DuBose jet down Stevenson and go out into McCoppin. So I think if there's another garage with cars coming in and out right there, it's going to add congestion and difficulty for bicyclists and for pedestrians. I'd like to know if the building will shadow Stevenson Street. I know I read the document online, and it said that the only shadow would be on McCoppin Hub Park, but I'm wondering if it included streets. So Stevenson Street, which is already 1/3 dark from the freeway ramp, cannot afford to have more darkness on the other end of the street. It makes it less safe. People dump things, and this trash gets collected because of where we are, because it's dark. My third issue is with the ground floor retail. I would urge the planning department and the commission to tell the planning department to take an inventory of ground floor retail on buildings built maybe since 1990. Most of those buildings are empty on the bottom. You could only have to go to the Fillmore Center to see what happens when ground floor retail doesn't work. Ground floor retail is not working. If I'm looking at the buildings going from Valencia up to Castro, there's Dock in the Box. There's one of those doctor places. There's an H&R Block, and that's about it. So the rest is empty, and there may be a restaurant. I don't know how well that restaurant's doing. So ground floor retail does not seem to be working in San Francisco, and I would really, and this project we can't afford more blank space on Market Street at the hub area. It's already a dicey area. So we need to figure out a better plan. Maybe the ground floor retail needs to be very small and geared toward local vendors, even artists, give them a break on the rent, because an empty space there is not going to be good for us. So I just hope that you'll do that throughout the city. Let's look at ground floor retail and see if it's working. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Howard Flax with Flax Art and Design. It may seem kind of odd that I'm here since it was our business that was displaced by this project, yet I wish to voice my support for it. My father shook John Nuss's hand 38 years ago when we moved into that building, and that developed the tenor of a very long-term relationship with the Nuss family. I think the Nuss family decided quite well to bring on the Presidio Development Partners and Mark Conroe for this particular project. Via John Nuss, I got to know Mark and his team over the last year and a half or so, and can give you a very solid character reference with regard to he and the way he approaches his development projects. After working with him for that period of time, we moved last week. So, very much from a personal perspective, I'd hate to see everything that we've been working towards successfully moving our business to Oakland, which we just did 2 days ago, come for naught. We want to see this come through for all parties, and I can fairly well assure you that if Mark and his team are behind the project, it will be a success for the city.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Could I have the overhead, please? Good afternoon, Commissioners. Rob Poole with the Housing Action Coalition, speaking on behalf of our 300-plus business organization individual members. We reviewed this project back in November, and it's kind of not very well zoomed in. We reviewed the project back in November, and we supported that version, but we actually think it's been improved since then in a number of areas. Particularly, we're happy that they're no longer asking for a CU for parking, or now below the as of right. Generally, we do support less parking in projects and one-to-one bike parking per bedroom, and I think this project now achieves that. It is a very challenging site, but I think this is an appropriate project for this location in such an area so well served by transit and near jobs and neighborhood amenities. When they presented to us, I think they had just finally finalized the deal with Flax, and I think that was a lot of the time they expended on community outreach. And that was a challenging task, and I think they definitely succeeded. And after we suggested they reach out to some trade unions and to local neighbors, especially HVNA, and they've done that, and so that would give them, an improvement according to our guidelines. The 12% on-site affordability is, it's absolutely fine. Those are the policies that we set forth as a city. If there are policies that can help improve that, whether it be the inclusionary dial or a local density bonus program to be implemented, and the developer can take advantage of that, we would absolutely support it, and this project would get more support from us. There is nothing to preserve here. They're meeting the basic criteria for environmental features. Otherwise, we think this is a very good project for the city. And the ground floor issue, that comes up a lot at our meetings, actually, about retail space and how it's going to be used. And it's definitely something to consider, but we actually think that just because there is so much open space that flows out in front of this project on the street, it actually has a great chance of being very successful. So we think this project will help enhance the pedestrian experience and be a great asset to the city. So we hope you can approve it today and move it forward. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is James Faber. I'm a supporter of this project. I'm the business owner and San Francisco resident. My property is 1695 Market Street, which is directly adjacent to this project. I have been at that property for 15 years, a fond neighbor of the Flax and the McCroskeys. I've watched the neighborhood transform over 15 years. Personally, I've invested countless years in time just building the business, and the departure of Flax is something that I consider to be sad. However, I think that this project is a fantastic addition to the neighborhood. The main points being that I've seen incredible development both on the Octavia side and on the Valencia side, and our little part of Market Street has sort of been stuck in between. In the meantime, the businesses, that being Flax, McCroskey's, and D'Alessio Market and Bakery, have flourished there, and I think the addition of residential dwellings right in that point of Market Street will create greater foot traffic and more of a neighborhood present all day and during the evenings. Additionally, I like the idea of the extensive outside sidewalk development. I really think that is an incredible neighborhood with tons of city employees that will be really well utilized. Flax, as I said, has flourished there, and I actually think that that's going to be a highly sought after commercial property. And with that, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed. And Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you very much. Mic on. Thank you to staff for this project. I've actually frequented Flax over the years for my budding hobbies and crafts. So appreciate that you guys were able to relocate to Oakland. I just have a couple questions. I'm confused. The project documents that we got say that they're paying the on-site. They're paying the fee, not providing the units on-site. So which one are we doing today?
So this was a last-minute change that occurred within the past week since the staff report was released, but the project is going to provide the affordable housing on-site, and we were able to get the Costa-Hawkins exception agreement executed by the city attorney's office.
Okay, and my memory's not failing me. That was not represented in the materials that we got, right?
That's correct. That's correct. In the materials, at the point that the staff report came out, the project sponsor had informed the department that they would actually pay the affordable housing fee. But between that time and today, things changed.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think this is a good project. I know I've heard some of the public comment on parking, on retail spaces. I'll just do a couple comments on those. In terms of the parking, I do think that McCoppin Street is the correct place for that parking to come out, or for the cars to come out. I appreciate that the parking ratio has been reduced to what's allowed on site. I think that that's right for where this is in terms of being a transit-rich location. I also highly appreciate that there are more than enough bike parking spaces is something that we're always looking for in spaces like these. In terms of the retail space, this is part of the Better Market Streets plan, as well as the hub, which we've seen presentations over the past number of months. I think this is a neighborhood that is definitely going to be in transition in terms of the number one, the number of pedestrians that are walking around this site, as well as what's going to be around in the general area. So I do feel that the ground floor retail is great for the spot, and it will be well utilized. And in a more general comment, because I know this is, the public commenter who says something about retail spaces said, generally in the city, we should look at how are they being utilized and what are we doing with those spaces. We've had a few hearings. We usually have like one annually on the state of retail sort of in San Francisco. Our role as a commission is we're not leasing agents. We don't actually fill those spots. We don't recruit businesses. We look at land use and what's going to be the best use long term for those neighborhoods. And I would say that having retail, you need the space there before you can talk about what you're going to do with it. And I think that having retail options on the street is much better than the alternatives, which is either having residential, which works for the people who live in those units, but not for anyone else, or other spaces that aren't publicly accessible. So I do think this is a great space for retail space and the right size for that building and that site, and sounds great, and glad that we're getting the units on site, affordable units.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I'm also very supportive. I have a question for staff. There was one speaker that brought up a question about the ground floor 15-foot height, and it seems to me this is compliant because I believe it's 84 feet in an 85-foot zone. So what
is there any other requirement that it doesn't seem like they're getting any additional height here, unless I'm reading the report wrong.
So, Commissioners, on page 16 of the graphics that you received as part of your packet, you can see that the floor to ceiling commercial height for the commercial unit is actually 18 feet 8 inches, and so I'm not sure exactly where.
Yeah. So it sounds like it complies and even exceeds what is expected, and the height is lower than what's allowed.
Yes, Section 145.1 of the code requires that ground floor commercial uses be at least have 14-foot floor to ceiling heights, and then any other accessory uses that are related to residential, like for instance, in this case, it would be the residential lobby. Elements like those would not be required to provide that 14-foot height, but the commercial would, and it does.
While I have you up here, another question. There was a mention of some walls being blank, but because they're property line walls, it would seem to me that they have to be blank because they don't want to create property line windows for what could be future buildings adjacent to them.
That's correct. So what the project sponsor agreed to do was actually wrap the material, the porcelain tile, around the primary facade of the building to areas where building walls would be exposed. But for portions of the building where it would potentially be blind walls, that's correct. We did not ask them to.
Okay, thank you. And finally, on the parking, if I'm doing my math right, they're ending up with 47 spaces. Is that right? For on-site for parking.
Let's see. It's so the code the code permits within this zoning district 1 parking space for every 2 dwelling units. So they would be permitted a total of 80 parking spaces by right, and they're proposing, I believe, 74, which is less than the amount that is permitted.
Yeah, okay. It's clearly lower than as a right. It's down to about 0.48 or something like that.
And just for clarification, the other spaces that are there that don't count towards that ratio include the 3 spaces that are permitted for the commercial use, and then the 2 car share spaces.
Yeah. And then the parking entrances, I thought I read that they're having one off of Stevenson and one off of McCoppin, if I'm correct. So there are 2 different entrances into the building. That
is correct. The department, did recommend initially that the McCoppin Street entrance, be removed, but the project sponsor made some changes, including narrowing the width of the garage door to 10 feet, and also adding the community room adjacent to it so that it would help activate that area of McCoppin Street.
Well, thank you. I have a few comments in addition. Yes, in that regard, it seems to make a lot of sense. You'll have a lot less traffic than you do now with some of the parking around Flax and the other uses, and residential parking is fairly small. People don't come in and out that often, and a very low ratio, and you have 2 entrances, which means each one will probably be used very little. And I think there will be a lot of demand for the retail. We are fortunately finally building a lot of housing in this dead zone because in addition to this project, we approved 2 other projects in nearby Market Street, and we have another one that will be coming before us fairly soon, I think, as well as the more longer-term Strata project, which is in that vicinity too. So I think for retail to be successful, you have to have a population base, but it's already being established, and I'm sure that once it's in there, a lot of neighborhood serving retail will fit in very perfectly in here. So it does a lot of good things. It provides almost $3 million in fees, and it's been in the process for 3 years, and I think they've done a very good job of modifying the design. I like that rust tone, and I like the idea of having the more pale cream-colored offset, which sort of harkens to the adjacent buildings. The masonry buildings historically in many areas have the stucco around the bays, and so it gives that same sort of contrast. So I like the way that's being done, and I think, they've done all the right things as far as I can see, so I'm supportive.
Okay, if I could just ask a couple of questions, maybe to staff for And it's about the sidewalk use, which is kind of a very cool and interesting rounded opportunity there. That's city property, correct?
That is correct.
And I see some activation here with some outside seating and such. What happens to that unique situation as far as maintenance, as far as maybe being Flax before a little bit of a tip of the hat towards the Arts Commission or a public art opportunity there? What's been discussed there?
For that topic, I defer to David Winslow. He's part of our UDAT design team.
Between the two, I guess, what we're requiring and what maybe they have planned.
As you may know, the 3,600 square feet in the project, because of the old cable car turnaround, is remnant land. It's for the last 60 years. It's been used privately for a parking lot. And we've had lots of discussions with city staff. 60% of it will be public realm space, 40%, or about 1,500 feet, will be restaurant seating. Our plan is to pay for all the costs to improve it, and then basically the city realm space, which have also asked us to provide utilities to, where it could be rotating art collections or whatever the public decides is best, is how we're currently planning to improve that space. I suppose in maintenance, the part that's not the restaurant seating would be maintained by the city as part of a public use. It's been under an MSC for the last 60 years, minor sidewalk encroachment permit.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Commissioner Moore.
No matter what you do, Flax will be a hard act to follow, partially for the reason that it was a congregating place for the arts, architectural, and community looking for art supplies. That made it, no matter what, it's a small site, it's a small building relative to what's coming up, but it will be very, very difficult to recreate anything which has the magnetism of Flax. I just have to say that having and continuing to be a frequent user of the store, I think the site is very challenging, and I think the building is making a good attempt to maximize of what is doable. On the doable, I have a couple of questions. In principle, I'm in support of housing on the site. However, there are a couple of challenges which I need some further answers to. And so one is, I'd like staff to tell me why, in its original recommendation, the garage entrance was proposed on Stevenson and has now moved on to McCopen. I would be interested in hearing that.
The original proposal as it came in had both an entrance on Stevenson and an entrance on McCoppen. Due to the slope of the site, it was advantageous for the functioning of parking in that kind of strange configuration of lot to be able to come in off Stevenson and as well as McCoppen to enable a accommodation of the podium level of parking working with the site. We recommended that they somehow figure out how to internalize that sloping if they wanted 2 levels of garage on that site to eliminate one of the garage entrances, that being the one on McCoppen that would be more adequately lined with an active use. And they made modifications in that direction to minimize the garage width and provide some active space at that ground floor on McCoppen. And so that's the evolution of that decision. There are currently still 2 garage entrances, one on McCoppen, one on Stevenson. There's also an added function, and if you care to elaborate, of, I believe, loading that comes in off Stevenson. So there was multiple uses associated with those garage entries, as well as the configuration internally and the slope of the site.
I'd like the Commission to pick this discussion up again. It's very unusual to have a residential building have 2 entrances, 2 garage entrances, but I want to continue and see that we circle back to that and to the issue of parking in principle. The exposed corner, which President Fong just brought up, I think raises a big question. If there is an interaction between the city owning the majority of right-of-way and the new site having a portion of it, I would have liked to see a more worked-out solution being part of what we're looking at today. Partially, we have received letters about the heavy bicycle traffic in this area not being addressed. This should be something which we would be discussing, because just putting umbrellas there and leaving a rather undefined retail space having to become the answer isn't quite enough to address a critical problem like that, which gets me to the ground floor. In a situation where Flax obviously was the destination, that was a large retail space. There is no need that the future retail space at the bottom of a residential building would not have to be shown as a subdividable space in the drawing that I have, and there may be other drawings which I have not seen. This is only a single large retail space, which I think, in response to other observation and comments, is not a good solution for this particular area. I would like to see a smaller subdivision with multiple tenants in order to create or recreate the activation that Flax, as a large store, was able to do on their own. This is a very different situation, which gets me to the ground floor height. The ground floor height on Market Street is properly done. However, what is not properly done is that the lobby height is okay, but there is an inversion of how the retail expresses itself to the Market Street side, and that is introducing a transom, solid, opaque element on the upper end of the retail space, which makes the retail space look squashed in comparison to the lobby space. Tall lobbies are typical for office buildings. That is just the way it is. Here we are inverting the idea that along Market Street, retail height is what expresses itself, attracts people, and we're putting it into the reverse order. I just like to call that out. I think it's an important point to make, because it is not the lobby. The lobby by itself will be lit up 24 hours a day, needs to be bright and inviting, but it should not offset itself in the manner that it does with the required height for expressing tall retail. Mr. Winslow, would you like to comment on my interpretation on that? I think it is a correct interpretation of the Market Street guidelines.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's seems like an easy and straightforward suggestion. And by way of interpretation, I might say that maybe sometimes when we say celebrate the lobby entry for a particular project, that they might do so at the expense of this particular treatment of the retail, but doesn't mean that it's exclusively higher than the retail height expression. So that's fine.
My own questions echo the sentiments expressed about the blank wall from Valencia. That can be many, many years before that resolves itself. I believe for the time being it would be very advantageous to have a positive, active expression of that wall, either in form of differentiation in materials and or art or whatever it might be, but there needs to be something. I am a little bit disturbed, and I always am, when buildings are extruded in their massing in a way that they do not really do any kind of significant stepping down to the adjoining properties. We have that here. And I think as far as building expression is concerned, like the way the building reads to me, it is a disappointing building. I think it is foreign in its geometries. It's kind of strange and foreign in its materiality. And I had really hoped for something which I could be excited about. And again, I like the ideas about the residential. I like the ideas about how you address the site. I like to see further resolution on some of the access and parking garage dual access. I find that very uncomfortable. And again, subdividing retail and inverting or finding a better distinction between the required height of the retail expression and the appropriate expression for the lobby. Those are two things which should not be, as Mr. Winslow said, be resolved by playing them off against each other. We have some nested bedrooms. The unit plans are otherwise fine. I don't have any problems with that. What I am a little bit unhappy about, I hear very, very positive character statements about Mr. I'm not
Correct.
pronouncing it correct. I'm sorry. I apologize. And I see him engaging with the community in lots of back and forth letters, which we have been copied on. The thing I find disappointing is that somehow all of your final communication with the community wasn't quite finished yet. I at least want to say it that way. There was a lot of back and forth, and if you didn't have just that final moment of saying, okay, it's about compromise, it's about challenge, it's about making commitments, but we're not quite there. I just want to note that, and I appreciate the engagement, but it isn't quite there yet.
Commissioner Hillis.
Yes, so thank you. First of all, I wanted to note that I've been involved in bringing Flax to Fort Mason Center. They've got a 5,000 square foot store there, but this was done independently of this development, and that store is open and thriving. So just want to note that. I don't feel the need to ask for recusal, but I wanted to make that known. I think this, one, how you've kind of handled Flax is to be commended. I think this is a good, appropriate site for housing. I like the overall design and what you've done with it, and it's a fairly challenging site, and you've got some articulation, but I think you've handled it well without being without it being overdone on how the building is articulated. I kind of like how you've taken off the porcelain tiles up at the top and kept the bay windows. So I like the design. I like Commissioner Moore's suggestion just to strengthen that retail space and strengthen its height, kind of in a similar nature to what you did with the lobby height. The questions I have are on the kind of picking up is on the McCoppin Street frontage. And as you go down and up and down McCoppin Street, it's not the most active of streets. There are a lot of garage entries. There are a lot of blank walls. Flax didn't necessarily add to that. That was their entrance to the garage also. So I'm concerned with that space there being a garage entry, and I know we were trying to add activation through a community room. I don't know how active that will be or if shades will be drawn. So I guess to the developer, I think we heard from staff about the garage entry, and I think it is unusual for us to have two entries to a garage. It seems like the Stevenson entry could handle, it's a fairly wide entry that would both allow for ingress and egress. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts on why that's not enough. I mean, I see things on the ground floor like a fitness room that I think could be more active on McCoppin in providing just a presence for McCoppin, and I think it's needed there. So just, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on why isn't it enough just to have the Stevenson entry?
That's a good question. We obviously, when we reached out to our neighbors, those who are on next to Stevenson said, send your traffic to McCoppin. The McCoppin people sent it over to Stevenson. It's a little confusing because people live on Stevenson who are off of McCoppin. So
but they're on Stevenson on the other side.
On the other side.
This is like a little
so
dead
basically,
end.
Both people were doing this, and we sort of did three things. One is we dramatically reduced parking. Number two, we narrowed down the McCoppin. Number three, we had a traffic study done where it showed that the existing traffic from Flax parking lot would be reduced by 75%, 50 to 75% compared to the new project. So there is some traffic coming up McCoppin. We've made it as undesirable as possible for anybody to use that by narrowing down the entrance. But it was really as an expression or a commitment to our neighbors on both sides, not just the two who have spoken here. I will say we talked to 12 people in McCoppin, and 2 expressed concern over that. So it's not unanimous that there shouldn't be any entrance there. But we did sort of come back finally and land in shrinking the garage and having those 2 entrances. The loading is off Stevenson,
right,
near Goff, which also kind of complicates that entrance.
But would you think there would be a big impact to lose that street? Because Stevenson is it's Flax loading now, right? There's behind McCroskey's, and there's a parking lot on the south side. There really isn't much there.
We expressed an openness to staff of eliminating McCoppin, but it just was a matter of sort of time and wanting to come before you and ultimately believing that we made a commitment to people on both sides that we would have one on each side.
Right.
And it's a connected garage. You can go out either way. It's a single level garage.
Right. And, depending on where people are going, they'd probably choose the alternative that gets them to the place they're going. And I would say most would probably go out McCoppin, given it's not the easiest, but I don't know. But I just don't think you have a lot of neighbors on Stevenson that are impacted by this. There's a parking lot in McCroskey's and one residential with D'Alessio. So I share that concern that some of the neighbors brought up about McCoppin. I mean, the question though would be, what would you put there if there wasn't a garage? Because I think I'm not convinced a community room is going to activate it. I think something like it.
We showed, sorry to interrupt, we showed staff an alternative plan where we basically grew. We actually brought some services to McCoppin because it is a sort of a freestanding building. We brought made it easier to use your bike instead of going over to Market Street. You could actually park it in a bike room there. We expanded the community room, which we thought staff suggested to show how it could be converted to retail if City College gets developed and McCoppin does become sustainable for retail. We could convert it to retail from a community room. So we do have that optionality built into the current plan. It would just grow bigger than what you see in the current plan because we'd get rid of the garage entrance and put community room / retail along the front to activate.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, that would be my preference, is kind of not have that entry. I think you can serve everything you need on Stevenson and try to take you up on that offer to do something more interesting on McCoppin and possibly in the future. I don't think it's ripe for retail now, but could be as things develop on McCoppin and preserve that ability, which I don't think you'd ever get back if you put a parking garage there. So thank you. And as far as the retail, I think it's great that you have retail on Market, and it's important to. It's a challenging retail environment. I know Commissioner Moore's comments about breaking it up, but I'd also like to give you the flexibility if you find a larger tenant to put one in there, because I think across the street as you go up towards Octavia, there's some smaller spaces, but they tend to be those tend to be more vacant than some of the larger ones. So, I'm open to kind of giving you the flexibility. I think it could be divided the way it's structured, but could also be used in the size it is. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Commissioner Richards.
Okay. First off, hearing the testimony about what you've done, your community service, makes me proud that you're a fellow San Franciscan, Mr. Conroe. So I want to get that out of the way. Absolutely. I was actually overjoyed hearing all that. I think a project here absolutely makes sense. I think the way you've done it is creative. Picking up on some of the other comments, the first floor height limit is 18.8 on Market Street for the retail. However, I called it a notch. Commissioner Moore, who's an architect, called it a transom. It reads like it is squashed. So it's still 14 feet. Okay. Does it serve any purpose? Maybe come on up. Does that transom serve any purpose?
Well, in consideration of the lobby and the retail along that frontage, because we tried to give over as much space to the retail frontage as possible, that the residential entry lobby became smaller because of that trade-off. So we wanted to still give them a sense of a presence for the residents that live there. So give them height and light into their lobby as well, but still maintain a very generous ceiling and glass line for the retail. So I think they're in proper balance in terms of their presence on the street, that the narrower lobby gets plenty of light, right, and the retail also gets a great glass line.
So is there any other way? So what I'm hearing is that there's no real structural reason why it exists other than to differentiate the two spaces.
It's to differentiate each function and make them work optimally for both.
Okay, and the retail is 14 with that transom.
Right.
Okay. Would there be a way, in your opinion, to allow the 18.8 and 18.8 to still exist, but still celebrate the lobby, as well as allow the retail to have even a higher height?
I think that's possible, yes.
Okay, I mean, that would be one of my thoughts on maybe how to go there. Since it doesn't serve any purpose other than to differentiate it, maybe there's a creative way you might be able to do that. On the retail space, we've had these issues in the upper market because, this is Market Octavia Plan. I worked on Market Octavia Plan now 10 years. I was on the Market Octavia CAC. And we struggle with the retail presence as well, because we're bringing a lot of retail on the market now. You go up to the Linea building, I guess it's at Buchanan, and you got an H&R Block, and you have a medical service use there. Not terribly exciting, and I think what's wrong with that retail space might not be the size, but it's the way it appears on the street. It's more like a flat, something you'd see probably in a strip mall in Sunnyvale rather than in San Francisco. So, I like the idea of having at least one or two small retail spaces dedicated. We had that work at the Bank of the West building at Market Noe and 16th, where the Bank of the West is 2,500 square feet, and we created 3 500-square-foot retail spaces, and they're thriving. And it's amazing. There's a candy store, a coffee store, and a beauty store. So I would urge you to explore something like that and still allow a bigger space for a restaurant or something else. Hopefully not a formula retail use. Question, Mr. Conroe, the parking. I mean, parking adds costs to the building because you have to dig down. You're unbundling the parking. I'm imagining it's going to cost so much per space. It actually appears more like car storage to me because you're using stackers and things. Why not just not have the parking? I mean,
it's a fair question. I know this issue receives a lot of attention in San Francisco, and it's really just a balance between what we think the market, certainly over the last 100 years, has wanted, and maybe what the market may want in 20 years from now. So we're totally on board with reducing it slightly below the 0.5. I just think we're making a $100 million bet on parking, and so we just are kind of hedging our bet by providing some parking. In some ways, the stackers make it less desirable to use your car, so that actually encourages people to use transit. But in the end, it's just making a big bet, and we didn't really feel comfortable going to zero.
Sure.
But we are comfortable with going to 0.48.
Sure. Would you think that, given transportation network companies and all that, and driverless cars and all this stuff is virtually on the horizon, you have a huge bet, and I completely understand wanting to be a little bit more risk averse in this kind of changing demographic, of maybe including, instead of more actual dedicated car spaces, if you have only 2 car share spaces,
yes.
Can you add a couple more of those and take a couple of the other spaces away? Is that possible?
It's certainly possible, and it's something we're open to.
Okay, I think that would be one of my recommendations as well. The right-of-way, we heard some concerns or questions around that. It hurt not being kind of defined enough. Maybe can you comment on that?
Well, it was a challenge because on the one hand, we wanted to activate the street and really bring the building out to the sidewalk in the sense of having that kind of like you'd see in a European city with sidewalk dining. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity to do that. On the other hand, it's public space, so the city really wanted to take most of it and create public realm space, programmable space for the future. And we try to balance those two. We put in seating. The seating actually mimics the cable car wheels, and there'll be a monument there that calls out the history of the site. So we really kind of balanced between having some sort of being the restaurant use and some being majority being public space. So in that sense, we didn't really feel it was our job to program the public space. We did make improvements to it. It'll look new. It'll transition up to the sidewalk, but it's really the public's job.
If there were different programming for the public space around different events and things, I mean, is that the tables and chairs there dedicated? Could they be moved back? Could it be flexible in terms of its activation if it needed to be?
And I mean, to not only have 60%, the other 40%, if you want it. Yeah, those planners, there is that opportunity, I think. We did make it pretty transmissive or open. That was one of the changes we made over time because they didn't want it to feel like a barrier.
Right.
So we kind of had it be more open. But yeah, those things, we could have removable or movable planners if we did want to program and pull it in. We could do that.
Great. Well, just one observation. I go to Delisle several times. It's a very windy kind of corridor, and you sit out there, and a lot of times you freeze. So when that wind comes down Market Street, so there may be times where it might be better to actually reprogram it some other way. So I'll ask Mr. Winslow his opinion on that. One more item I do have is the blank wall issue. Back when we were working on Market Octavia, I thought, and I should pull out my design principles booklet, I thought we actually created some type of allowance for or requirement in the principles to not have blank walls by using different things to be creative, knowing that eventually buildings will be built up, but we didn't want to create flat blank walls. I think a good example of that was 2001 Market Street, the Whole Foods site that Prado did. They did a kind of a good job, at least on that side, knowing that eventually it might be covered up. Anything, in your opinion, on that you might be able to do?
Well, we did, as the staff pointed out, we did wrap it. There are those bank walls. They are property line walls that if the motel ever redeveloped, they would that whole frontage would be locked. Right. But we're open to, and we think it's actually an interesting opportunity to pick up on the history of the Flax being an art store and the Mission being an arts district, to sort of celebrate those walls with a mural or something like that, without having it be a long, drawn-out process. But we are open to putting art on those walls.
Okay, thank you very much. Sure. Mr. Winslow, just a quick question for you on the right-of-way. You maybe give me your opinion around the way it's activated, the way that may be mobile and moving, and just want to hear your thoughts.
Well, so, it's a tough problem, and we kind of looked at it together with the sponsor collaboratively to a certain degree. Knowing full well that it's within the public right-of-way. It's the city-owned property, but it's more than just your typical sidewalk. It's a pretty substantial space. And then also full knowing that there's some transformation coming in the near future, hopefully, to Market Street. So not being able to definitively know what those materials and palette of materials are, still wanting to do something now that marks this space as a special intersection, as I think the staff report correctly identified this intersection of 4 different neighborhoods. And geometrically it's a focus as you come down Market, as you come down Waller Street, as you're coming down Valencia Street. We were looking at it in the sense of a lot of other public open spaces along Market and other places in the city that have a very special civic nature. I don't want to say Mechanics Plaza is the example, but it's certainly of that stature, or could be. Now, getting a place to act and behave like Mechanics Plaza in this location would be a challenge. Some of the thoughts just that I've had since the last few weeks is, well, we have a better streets plan. This project, unfortunately, does not trigger the requirements of Better Street Plan by, I think, 10 lineal feet of frontage. But the idea that in the Better Streets Plan you have this area where outside of the public the sidewalk right-of-way, you can elaborate with higher quality materials, paving stones, etc., trees. You can pretty much animate the space within a range or a palette prescribed in the Better Streets Plan. So that was one thought, that maybe the plaza space could take on the character of a paved zone with trees, at least with other furnishing elements. Maybe it's seating, bike racks, and other things. But that doesn't take care of the programming of how it's used on a daily basis, how it's cleaned, how it's activated.
If I might just add to that, I mean, I think there's a couple of challenges with this because of the Better Market Street Plan that's coming. It's still in design and environmental review, and the fact that this is space that will be under the control of Public Works. So we need to figure out with them because they are concerned about maintenance responsibilities as well. So we have to there's a number of sort of unknowns here that makes this a little challenging more than most. Plus the unknown of what happens to the rest of the curve if the hotel site develops, which I suspect it will. So I think in some ways it might be best to use the design as almost a placeholder for future improvements. But still allow it to be used in some way, on an almost kind of temporary changing basis rather than fix the design in stone today. That would be my thought.
And that was kind of I think that's, a fairly straightforward palette that's given in the Better Streets plan that could be done. And if Better Market Street comes along later and says, no, we're going to use another material to unify things, so be it. It's not a great loss, but at least we have a good quality temporary.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. And lastly, I agree with Commissioner Hillis. The garage entrance on McCoppin, given that there's more car storage than car, active parking in and out, and that the counts were going to go way down anyways. And Stevenson Street doesn't have a lot going on in terms of residences, at least that kind of stub. I would support having just one entrance on Stevenson and maybe putting the fitness center or something else on McCoppin. Thank you.
Commissioner Moore.
I'd like to get back to the discussion on the McCoppin site one more time. Assuming that we are not resolving the garage entrance to go away because it's also a circulation and traffic issue, I'd like to talk about the diagrams which are included on page 26 for us, speaking about the coffee bar in a more squarish versus rectangular form in what is really actually a residential lobby. And given the fact that I find it a little bit unusual to animate a coffee bar, a residential lobby as a coffee bar, the Market Octavia plan, I think, requires that lobby heights are different from what is proposed here. They are supposed to be 15 feet, I think, is my understanding. And that is, I don't think, being achieved here. Could the architect please talk about the ideas of what's being entertained here?
For the residents or just for?
Market Octavia requires residential lobbies to be 15 feet, and I don't think we're doing that here.
We can look into that, but it was our understanding that the Market Street frontage would require that height, and the other frontage on McCoppin, since it's not actually a commercial use per se, could be a lower at that point.
Commissioners,
could Mr. Winslow weigh in on that, please?
Commissioners, just as a point of clarification, the ground floor ceiling heights typically only apply to non-residential uses, and right now, as the plan is currently proposed, it's a community room, which would be basically subservient to the residential use. So we would count that community room as part of the residential use.
The function of the room, if you look at the plan depiction, is basically a lobby. The fact that you animate a lobby because of street requirements and because of this particular location next to the garage, because you make a coffee bar there, does not relieve it out of its primary function as being a lobby, which then means, and I'm not trying to argue here, that would then mean that the height of this lobby would have to follow the plan intent being 15 feet. I'll leave that discussion as a challenge to you to further examine. And then the one thing I'd like to say is I reminded myself on a discussion we had last week, and that is the awkward situation we are in was legislation being introduced that the affordability is being raised to 20% or more. We discussed that in the context of the Schoenstein project. I would have liked to see this project come forward. We do not have any regulatory tools. They're not in place yet. However, the discussion is pending. And so I would have liked to see this project come forward with a 20% affordability ratio.
Commissioner Antonini.
Well, based upon the comments, I'm going to see if I can put together a motion for approval. And I would certainly appreciate any weigh-in from project sponsor on some of these measures, but I'd like to see an attempt to increase the height of the McCoppin Street entrance to 15 feet as part of the motion, and then modify the transom on the Market Street entrance to the retail as well as the lobby to more clearly show the height that's, I think, 18.8 if I'm not mistaken. So that would be the first part of the motion of approval. Then I would like to see the retail broken into a minimum of 3 spaces, although the distribution of those would be up to project sponsor. It could be 1 large one and 2 small ones. I'd like to see 2 additional car share spaces and 2 less parking spaces. And then continue to work with the city to improve the entrance off of Market Street to make it more welcoming, perhaps with an idea towards some sort of shielding to the west to minimize the wind factor as much as possible. Then also the motion would include an activation in some form of the blank wall in Valencia with some sort of mural or artwork. And I would just ask that you continue to work with staff to analyze the possibility of the garage entrance being eliminated on McCoppin and only have it on Stevenson. I would not necessarily make that part of the motion because I can see some compelling reasons to keep it there, but that would basically be my motion for approval. I welcome your comments.
Just one question on the first, your first item. I'm not sure if I understand the 15-foot on McCoppin. What was your goal there?
Well, I think as was brought up by Commissioner Moore, she wanted to have that be a little bit more welcoming entrance, I guess. What is our height of that at the present time?
All the floors are roughly 9 feet, so that's how we end up with 18 feet on Market Street because we carved out 1 floor all the way back for the full depth of the retail space on Market.
Got to change the grade.
So we either lose 2 units by carving out and have 18 feet on McCoppin or keep it at 9 feet would be the alternatives.
Yeah, I don't want to see you lose any additional units there. I'm not so sure. I would probably, in my motion, then I would modify it to do what you can to enhance that as much as possible to a little bit higher height without having to lose units.
Mr. Sucre?
Commissioner Antonini, just as a point of clarification for your motion, your draft motion currently has some errata in the affordable housing conditions, particularly for the number of required units as well as for the unit mix. So just as a part of your motion,
that would
you would clarify the affordable housing conditions to specify 160 dwelling units, 19 of which would be affordable housing units. The project includes a unit mix of 15 studios, 81 one-bedroom units, 64 two-bedroom units, which would result in 2 studios, 11 one-bedroom units, and 7 two-bedroom units as part of the affordable housing mix.
Right. Thank you. I noted that as part of the errata correction.
Commissioner Antoni, may I make one further comment? On the retail space on Market Street, it's about 3,600 square feet. So we're open to subdividing it. We really did want the market to speak to us versus kind of arbitrarily cutting it up before we talk to the market. If we do that, I would ask that it broken into 2 spaces because that brings it down to an average of about 1,800 feet, and it gives us more flexibility.
All right. I will modify my motion. I think 2 spaces minimum is good, and it gives you more flexibility.
Do I hear a second to that motion? All right.
I would second it, but just for the project sponsors, quick question. I'm sorry, I'm taking it out of order because I want to second this. In terms of subdividing the space, is that something that you could do at a later date, depending on whether or not you have tenants that might want less space?
Certainly, we would. The process would be once we have a project to present to the public, we would then go out to the leasing market and see who's interested. we're willing to today agree to subdivide into at least 2 spaces. That does restrict who we can talk to because it's 3,600 square feet. So now we're probably talking about a 2,000 and 1,500 square foot user or something like that. So it would be prohibited now if this goes forward, as discussed, talking to a single 3,600 square foot restaurant.
Right, so my question is, well, I guess getting to my question, if you were to go to people, businesses that might want to take a larger space and you don't have any takers, would you then be able to subdivide if Commissioner Ward, please
no, there's no question. If I think there are, we've had a number of people already come to us interested in the space. But if we didn't find anybody at 3,600 feet, we would certainly subdivide it, and that's certainly something we'd go out anyway and look at, and break it into pieces, and just see what the market says about whether it's 1, 2, 3, or more users. We would be open to all those alternatives.
Okay.
Versus being restricted to not looking at one user.
Okay.
Commissioner Moore, is it related to this?
Yes, it relates directly to that. In order to
I
do
was gonna
any
talk about that,
subdivision,
too.
in order to do any subdivision,
Let's, there's an order here. Let's try to stay within the order, okay?
Sorry, we'll just keep going then.
Commissioner Hillis.
thank you.
So I just want to say that I agree with some of Commissioner Antoni's, but I don't know, was that second? Did you second that or not?
I was going to second it without talking about subdividing the space. I mean, if they can't find a user, then they will subdivide the space themselves.
So was that a second or not?
Doesn't sound like it.
Would you be willing to take? Yeah, that is not a second.
Okay.
So I may try, I mean, because on some of the points, one, I think the McCoppin Street, it's not retail, it's now a community room, and I would like to get rid of I would, and I'll try to cobble together a motion that maybe we have future discussion on, but I would want to get rid of the McCoppin Street garage and just have the Stevenson garage, work to activate that space, not necessarily with retail, because I don't think retail is going to work, but with an expanded community room or a fitness room, that would be part of the residential. I think the problem was trying to go to 15 feet on that. One, it may never be retail. Two, you may eliminate you might have to eliminate the housing above that, which I think the trade-off is more for housing than it is for kind of an expanded fitness room or community room. So, and then on the retail, dividing the retail, I think we do have concerns about like an H&R Block or something like that that's not very active. Obviously Flax is a great active space. D'Alessio is good too. But I don't think just by saying we want to divide that up, we eliminate that. I actually think it is the market that'll dictate that space. Is it a challenging retail environment? D'Alessio is fairly large. Flax, could have gone into a 3,600 square feet. They took 5,000 at Fort Mason. I think as we start to divide that up, we eliminate some users that may actually work nicely in that space at 3,600 feet. We all have preferences. We don't want another kind of medical use or something like that, but I don't think necessarily dividing that or not dividing that space gets us there. So I would move to approve the project with the condition that it eliminates the McCoppin Street garage and only has the entrance and exiting for vehicles on Stevenson Street. We activate that entire frontage with other uses, residential, like a fitness center or the community room. We work with staff to activate or enhance the blank wall on the west side of the project. We better delineate the commercial, or have a stronger commercial frontage on Market Street and differentiate that from the residential, working with staff. And I think at least that's it for now that I would put in there.
I'll second that. How about the car share? Is that part of it?
Oh, sure. The car share and the affordable housing issues. Yeah. So both.
Oh, yeah, I know all the errata, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm second.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Moore.
I'd like to clarify that in order to show, just as a idea that the ground floor plan is subdividable, irrespective as to whether or not you do it or you don't, the diagram that is in front of us does not show that that space is
Could be
subdividable.
subdivided, sure.
The subdividable retail space requires some hinterland, that is a corridor and some storage area, access to storage. And the way this is drawn, this motion needs to basically include that the infrastructure for a subdividable plan is indeed drawn on the drawing. Otherwise, we're just talking and don't create the reality. What he later on does is a totally separate question. He has a flexibility to even further divide it into 4 spaces. If there are lots of people who love the area, there are art stores who want to come in and do things or whatever, he can do that. But by leaving it as it is and only saying he should, we're not doing anything. So the motion has to include that the plan properly reflects the subdividability and let him do what he needs to do, hopefully minus formula retail and hopefully minus any, we're not, minus, not HR block, I cannot use that word, that's discriminatory, but zero type space, right?
Non-active uses.
Non-active use, branch bank or whatever. So that would be one. I would still ask Commissioner Hillis that the issue of the required ground floor height on McCopen is re-examined by staff, because I'm not making it up. Margaret Octavia says residential lobbies are to be 15 or 18 feet, and this one is not. And if the provisions for Margaret Octavia stipulate that, then this building has to deliver that, unless it asks for an exemption.
Commissioner, I think the issue is that the lobby itself is not required to be 15 feet. I think it's the non-residential space that's required to be 15 feet. Residential space, including the lobby, is not subject to that requirement, is my understanding.
And I'm going to add to that understanding of my understanding, which is just that in the Market Octavia plan, there's a predisposition for height at the ground floor, whether it be commercial at a certain height. 15 feet is preferred along Market Street. On other districts in Market Octavia, it's given as a 1-to-1 for a height increase of the overall building height. For residential, the predisposition is to get if there is residential use, i.e. residential units, it is to get a raised residential unit above the sidewalk on the order of 3 to 5 feet, but that's more of a policy level thing as opposed to specifically how it's written in the code as a must-do in the Market.
I guess the point here is that it's not likely that the McCoppin Street side will be an active retail space. It's not.
Right.
There's no retail on McCoppin right now. And so from a standpoint of kind of the design of that street, I think what's more likely to happen there, if there's no garage entry, is that it be uses that are related to, that are open only to the residents. And so, my sense is that it's less important to have a high space on McCoppin because of that. I mean, certainly it's important to do it on Market, but it isn't an active retail, publicly oriented retail street, and it's not likely to be for a very long time, is my opinion. So that's why I think it's less critical on McCoppin than it would be on Market. That's my only thought.
But can we amend the motion? I mean, maybe a suggestion is amend the motion to add your comments about showing divisible retail space on Market Street, and also have staff work with the project sponsor to maximize the height of that McCoppin Street frontage, ground floor frontage, without eliminating, let's say, second floor of housing there.
And I personally, since I'm still my turn, I would still really like to see much stronger work on the facade and materiality of the building. I think that building is yet not successful from my perspective. It is too.
I'm okay as a seconder as far as the
Those changes.
modifications were suggested.
Commissioner Richards.
I'm good.
Commissioner Wu.
I just wanted to reconfirm, Mr. Sucre, those numbers. You said it was 19 affordable units, and what was the mix of studios versus ones and twos?
Currently, the project has a mix of 15 studios, 81 one-bedrooms, and 64 two-bedrooms. So it will result in 2 studios, 11 one-bedrooms, and 7 two-bedrooms in terms of the affordability mix.
Same ratio.
Does that add to 19?
No, it does not.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, math isn't Rich's.
Okay, this is working on the math. Commissioner Johnson.
Okay, Commissioners, we have a motion.
Hang on, he's calculating.
I know.
He's calculating.
So, Commissioners, it would be 2 studios, 10 one-bedrooms, and 7 two-bedrooms.
Commissioners, we have a motion that has been seconded to approve this project with conditions as amended by staff with an errata sheet, and by the Commission to include the following conditions: that the McCoppin Street entrance eliminate the garage, maximizing the height without eliminating housing, activating the McCoppin Street frontage, a stronger commercial frontage on Market Street, enhancing the west facade, providing 2 car share, eliminating 2 of the individually independent off-street parking spaces, and for the plans to clearly indicate and provide for utilities for multiple retail spaces on Market Street. Did I capture everything?
It resolves the contradiction between the Market Street retail and lobby space, the issue about
We're just going to get rid of
yeah, some glazing up there.
Yeah.
Big element.
Is that okay?
And better defining the commercial versus residential uses on Market Street.
It's not uses, it's the expression of residential versus commercial.
It's the height of the height of the transparency on the retail, right?
The project sponsor said he would do it.
Commercial versus residential.
As well as the affordable housing errata.
Yeah. Did it include McCoppin Street, Mr. Ionin?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else, Commissioners?
Can the Commission provide, I'm sorry, Doug Wood, Department Staff, can the Commission provide clarification regarding the condition to reduce parking spaces?
There's a reduction of off-street parking spaces to provide for 2 car share spaces.
Additional car share.
Just swapping 2 for 2.
Okay.
2 for 2.
Great.
So that would result in 4 car share spaces.
Right.
Okay.
Commissioner Moore.
We had a question last week, and that was if in June the affordability ratio increases, would that retroactively affect other buildings that we are currently approving? It wasn't answered last week. It's a difficult question, but I would just be curious.
Commissioners, there is pending legislation that you will review next week that has grandfathering provisions incorporated into it. And there are different levels of grandfathering depending on when the project first made application to the department. So it would depend on the exact date that they came in with their application. There might be a slight increase. It's a step level. If it came in before, I think, 2014 at a certain level, it wouldn't have any increase. Between 2014 and 2015, it goes up 1%. Between 2015 and 2016, it goes up another %. It would depend on exactly when their application was submitted, and it would require this legislation to be approved.
Right. That's clear. Without it.
On that motion, Commissioners, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously, 7-0. Commissioners, shall we move on? Thank you, Commissioners. Item 9A and B for case numbers 2013. If those persons leaving this chamber could do so quietly, we would certainly appreciate that. Items 9A and B. Excuse me, ma'am, if we could have the conversations outside, please. Items 9A and B for case numbers 2013.0431C and V at 750 through 754 14th Street, conditional use authorization, and the zoning administrator will consider requests for variance. Commissioners, after hearing and closing public comment on March 10th, you continued this matter to this date by a vote of 6-0. Commissioner Wu, you were absent on that date and need to acknowledge that you've listened to the transcripts and the audio for this hearing.
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Elizabeth Gordon of Planning Staff. This item was continued from March 10th so that the project sponsor could revise the project. to address the mix of unit sizes, specifically to include additional 2-bedroom units. The Commission also requested that the project sponsor evaluate the air and light to the new units proposed. The project sponsor has changed the scope of the project to include 4 new units, and this reduces the original proposal by 3 units and the proposal that you heard on the 10th by 2 units. Of the 4 units proposed, 2 units are 2-bedroom units. Those are those units along Belcher Street. They're bi-level units. There's a 1-bedroom unit proposed in the garden level, and the pastor's unit is still a studio unit. Again, the existing building is 10 units and also contains a church. And in order to conform to the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, the exterior and the first floor chapel spaces and the clustery windows must be retained on this building. While the revision to the project makes the project more compliant with the Market and Octavia area plan, the proposal cannot provide all new units as 2-bedroom units. So the project still requires conditional use authorization for that, and it continues to require conditional use authorization to allow increased residential density at this location. The project also includes variances concurrently heard by the zoning administrator. Due to the reduction in the number of units, the project no longer necessitates a variance from open space requirements. Staff has not received additional public comment since March 10th. The department recommends approval with conditions and believes the project is necessary and desirable. That concludes staff presentation. The project sponsor does have a presentation.
Thank you. Project sponsor, please.
5 minutes. You'll have 5 minutes as this is your second presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Todd Mentor, trustee for the Herskowitz Family Trust. Thank you for hearing us again in 2 weeks. We were here 2 weeks ago. And we worked on the plan. We listened to what you gave us as input. And not to repeat myself from my last discussion, but I am a big believer in the whole planning process. I don't know if you remember that, which is probably a little bit unusual to hear from a developer, but you end up with a better product. And I think that listening to you, dealing with staff, with the architect, I think we've come up with what I think is a good plan for the neighborhood. And I'm going to introduce Michael Bogan, who will give you the presentation. And again, thank you.
Can we have the laptop? Great. So I'm just going to take you on a quick walk through the project. This is our site. You know this corner, incredibly important public transportation node. We're merely 400 feet away. So we're going to argue that this is one place you'd want to have your housing density increase if possible. We're going to quickly take you through the building. 3 entrances on the left. Bike storage takes you half a flight down. In the center, you go half a flight up into the church and to the new proposed residences. And on the right-hand entrance is existing entrance up to the upper story residences. Area of work proposed, the first floor and the lower level. Here are our plans, which you've already seen. As indicated, we've got Unit 1, 2 bedrooms, 2 levels. Unit 2, 2 bedrooms, 2 levels. Unit 3 is a studio on the first floor. Unit 4 is a 1-bedroom on the lower level, garden level. We wanted to address the issue of the occupiability of the space, windows, light, and air, so we just wanted to show you some images. Close up of the windows on the lower level. This is a drawing to show the scale. They're 3 feet 8 by 2 feet 8, so they're not small basement windows. Here's a photo to show the human scale. We also wanted to show you how far we are below grade, the question being whether we can use the split level plan to increase residential density. If we look inside the building, let me go back for a second. So this is the main entrance. You go up half a flight to the church, and you go down half a flight to the proposed units. And we just wanted to show you what that stair looks like going up to the church. So it's actually half a flight. It's actually a split level, not a real basement. And similarly, if we go across to the lower level plan and look at this stair down to the bike storage, you can see shooting backward up the stair with the pastor here posing as a model, that we're really not that far below grade in the basement where the bike storage is. All right, so we're also going to just quickly show you that we're going to change the rear entry, which is now a sort of alley, into an activated entry space. And these are some renderings to show you what that's going to look like. It's going to take you down a half flight into the garden, which is a new amenity. We're adding the green space. Again, here is the existing on the left level below grade, so we're not that far below grade, and this is the proposed half lights down to the lower level. And this is the new green space at the base. Currently, you've got an alley and an old garage that's not being used right now, but we do have green in the neighboring yards, so you have the possibility for networking a mid-block green space visually at least. And again, here's the rendering of the proposed green space, which will be open to all the building's residents. And then moving on just quickly to show you the lower entrance into the units. There was a question about the windows, so we're going to look at them now from the inside. Here's a photo to show scale. Here's a rendering to show the relationship in Unit 2 to the 3 windows that would be in the unit. Here is a section which you've got in the drawings also, but we wanted to note that we are raising the floor to bring people closer to the windows, so it'll be less basement-like, as you can see in this rendering. The floor to ceiling height will be 9 feet. And then the natural light calc, which you also get in the drawings, are all good too. Quickly for residences, first one 1054, second one 1177, third 460, the studio, the last 937, and we just wanted to show you the living areas, 245, 324 for Unit 2, 330 for the studio, 370 for the one bedroom. So these are going to be large rooms. And again, inside staircase takes you up to the second floor. This is Unit 1 we're looking at. We wanted to show you quickly the windows on the first floor for these units. And then also one last thing, we're adding a laundry. So we'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Opening up to public comment, if there's any. Okay, not seeing any public comments closed. Commissioner Richards.
Thank you for listening. It's a much better project. I agree with you, and I move to approve.
Second.
There's no discussion, Commissioners. There's a motion.
Commissioner Moore has something.
Commissioner Moore.
We raised the issue of affordability last week, and I don't think we got an answer. Is the net increase in unit numbers subject to an affordability quotient?
No, it is not. It does not trigger the affordability requirements of Section 415.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
The threshold is currently 10 units. The project does not propose the addition of 10 or more dwelling
so
units.
Below that. Okay, thank you.
We've had this on a couple other projects, but yet it's not.
Another issue for you, zoning administrator, the sharing of an entrance for an institutional use and a residential use. Is there precedent to that, and what does it mean relative to security, exiting, etc.?
There's nothing in the planning code, to my knowledge, that would prohibit or prevent in any way having a shared access between an institutional use or in residential uses.
Interesting. Even if the residential use is not identified as being co-partnered with the institutional use?
No, I'm not aware of anything in the planning code that would prevent this.
Okay. The question, based on the presentation you just made, would you mind answering the question? You're saying, I'm asking the architect, please. You were saying you were raising the ground floor in order to have better access to the window. What is the current height, and what are you raising it to?
It's going up 18 inches. So it's, 10'6" now, Heidi?
So you're still having a substantial,
9
acceptable
feet.
residential height on
9 feet floor to ceiling. Yeah.
I still have, thank you very much. I still personally have concerns about the quality of the residential spaces we are creating. I do believe that particular Unit 3 is an unusual unit where the living room is basically in the basement. I question that as an idea that I can support, and so the livability and quality of units is, for me, remains a big issue, even if I appreciate the moves that have been made.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I agree with some of the concerns that Commissioner Moore expressed, but I think this project has gone a long way towards satisfying the two-bedroom requirement, and in a very challenged area. And we approved a situation earlier, I believe it was at Market Hayden Goff, and Market Octavia allows for lower than 40% if there are design challenges that make it difficult or impossible to have the 40% two-bedroom. And once again, it's the incremental amount. You can assess the 40% of the whole project, but incrementally, we're creating 50% new units with the two-bedroom. So, I think I'm supportive.
Commissioners, there is a motion that has been seconded to approve this matter with conditions. On that motion, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
No.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes 6-1 with Commissioner Moore voting against. I have no other items.
Variance would
Excuse me.
close the public hearing and be inclined to grant the requested variances.
Thank you, Zoning Administrator. My apologies. Commissioners, I have no other items under your regular calendar. It places us under the general public comment, for which I have no speaker cards.
Is there any general public comment? Not seeing any. General public comment is closed, and it's an early day. Meeting's adjourned.
It's the record for me.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.